Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. In today's episode, I sit down with Eric Valentine, the producer and engineer behind some of the biggest alternative and hard rock records of the past 3 decades. Before his production career took off, Eric was a member of the band T-Ride, giving him invaluable perspective as a performer and producer. He's the man who helped craft the sound of such diverse songs as Third Eye Blind's Semi-Charmed Life, Queens of the Stone Age's No One Knows, and Smash Mouth's massive hit, All-Star. Here's my interview. Eric Valentine in the house. How are you, Eric?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here.
I've interviewed, well, at least one person that whose record you did, which is the Third Eye Blind record, the first record.
Yep, first Third Eye Blind record.
Which is an incredibly great sounding record.
It's very disorienting for me, and I still actually have to say it out loud occasionally. I recorded that record 28 years ago.
That's amazing.
Bizarre.
It's been that long.
It doesn't feel like 28 years, but yeah.
But before we talk about that, you're a drummer, right?
Yeah,
That's
grew up playing drums.
You had a band T-Ride that you were the drummer of back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
Talk about your evolution from that, your record that you made. Did you produce the record?
I did, yeah. Early on, I got interested in recording. I started playing drums very young. I was like 5 years old, and for some reason, it was just determined, like I'm going to be a drummer. And then I wanted to make songs. Drums are not a particularly great solo instrument. And so I had to
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah, I guess. And so I needed to learn how to record to make songs. And my brother was also a musician. He, plays guitar, and so we played in bands together when we were growing up. And so there were always like guitars and basses around and stuff. And so I started to figure out how to record just with home stereo equipment, overdub things, so I could make songs. And it was just fascinating for me. I really fell in love with it. My father was an electrical engineer. He worked in the aerospace industry. So I was around electronic stuff a lot. And so that may have fueled my interest in it somehow. But like that marriage between music and technology, like how those things combine together to capture something that has an emotional effect on people became really, really interesting to me. And, over time, getting deeper and deeper into it, ultimately, starting an audio company so I can get down really in the weeds of like, does this capacitor make me feel different than that capacitor? Get that crazy about it and really explore the whole thing as far as you could go. And so I got interested in it, started on home stereo equipment, eventually got like a little Tascam 4-track, started recording on that and was just obsessed. I just did it all the time. So by the time I joined the band T-Ride, I was only 16 years old when I joined that band. And we did a round of demos with being produced by the guitar player Ronnie Montrose, if you remember Ronnie
Of course.
Yeah. He was cool. It was an amazing opportunity. When it was all said and done, it wasn't cheap. We went to a really nice studio called Starlight.
And was this the first time you were in a big studio?
I had been in studios that you could call like a recording studio.
Yeah.
Before that, I'd been to the Music Annex in Menlo Park. I'd been to this guy Bruce Tambling, had a really cool studio in the South Bay. So I'd been in the studio a couple times. Starlight was a more significant place. And so we went and recorded. It was not cheap, for a band just like scraping pennies together.
Those are days when studio time was a couple grand a day or something.
It
probably.
Could be that much, you know? And so we were in that studio for maybe 3 days. The whole thing, cost like $5,000. It was expensive. And at the end of it, we got a demo tape on a cassette, and we were like, it's not really what we wanted, and it didn't come out the way we wanted. So that was the beginning of like, okay.
Was it you saying that, or were the other guys realize it? Okay.
And at this time, the band was really, the singer in the band was quite a bit older than I was, and it was really his band.
Okay.
And so he was the one that was like, this is not what it should be, you know? I mean, we had high hopes of like some combination of like Queen and Def Leppard and Van Halen and like all these things combined together, and it's like, this is definitely not that.
Right.
That was the beginning of like, okay, we just need to figure this out on our own. And, we started buying equipment, a little Fostex 1/2-inch 16-track and a Tascam console, like in a garage, and I just tried to sort it out myself.
Before we go any further, I want to quickly interject that 57% of you watching right now are not subscribed to my channel. So please hit the subscribe button now. Thanks. Is that record? Was it recorded that way, or was this recorded eventually in a studio?
Eventually, things did get, they did evolve. And so that band, what we ended up doing, because it was such a unique approach that we were taking, how those songs came together and how the recordings were constructed. It was really, everything was sort of puzzle pieced together on that thing. We made some demos that were reasonably impressive, and so got some interest from record companies, and we signed with a record company that was willing to give us the album budget so we could upgrade the studio and I would record it.
Okay, now that never happened back then. Or very rare.
Very rare. And I was 19, 20 years old.
Okay, and what label were you guys on?
Hollywood Records.
Okay.
They were money drunk, for sure.
Yeah.
They had Disney dollars and but the demos that we gave them pretty much sound like the final record. It wasn't that different. It was funny. They had us, you got to meet with some producers.
Right.
And so
they made you do that.
They made us do that.
Do you want to say who any of these people were or no?
For sure, yeah. They were we just made a list of people that we wanted to meet.
Okay.
But we had no intention of working with any of them.
Okay.
And so anybody that had worked with Led Zeppelin, Queen, T-Rex, like any of those bands, we were like, we'll meet with any of those people.
So did you meet Roy Thomas Baker and
we met Roy Thomas Baker.
And then
we met this guy named Mac that recorded a bunch of amazing stuff, but he did later Led Zeppelin stuff. He did like the Presence record.
Okay.
Met with Tony Visconti.
Wow.
Met with Eddie Kramer,
Great.
like all these people, and had amazing meetings with them. They were incredible. Like Tony Visconti was kind of one of my favorite because he took the meeting. Probably his manager said, "Hey, you should meet with this band." He came to our little crappy studio that we had set up. Came by. He's like, "Okay, what are you guys doing?" And we played him the stuff, and at the end of it, he's like, "I have no idea how any of this is getting done. Let's go have dinner. You guys are doing great."
That's great.
He was so awesome.
That's
He's like,
great.
"Hey, if you need me to just be there as a buffer and so you guys can just do what you do, you don't need anybody.
Yeah.
Whatever you're doing is incredible and I love it and you should just do it." He was so cool.
Yeah.
He was really, really awesome. But yeah, it was amazing meeting all those people. Roy Thomas Baker was exactly what you would expect. This incredible, super energetic, flamboyant, amazing guy that was just had no rules on anything. We brought him and it was like, "Hey, we need to record a guitar thing." It's like, "I'd love to see how you do stuff. What mic do you want to use?" He said, "What mics do you have?" And I was like, we didn't have a huge collection, but I listed all his stuff. He's like, "Okay, that sounds good." And I was like, "Well, which one?" He's like, "Just all of them." So I put up every single mic. We had this old Neve console. He pushed up every fader, it was like flipping phase and adjusting things and stuff, and kept sort of fucking with it, and then all of a sudden it was like, "Whoa, that sounds really cool." I mean, he was amazing. He
Wow.
was incredible. Never got a guitar sound like that again.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Okay, so for people that wonder, I just picked a song. Now, I've heard you talk about this record.
Yeah.
You made this over the course of, what did you say, 3 years or so?
Yeah, it was probably at least 3 years working on this stuff. And that song was around, it was one of the songs that was around the longest and had a very long evolution. And it's interesting, so in just the bit that you played there, the beginning section, I played drums throughout the song, which was sort of a hybrid of me playing live cymbals and toms, but the kick and snare were programmed. And so I'd have to play on top of the programmed kick and snare. But I played the guitar in the intro.
Okay.
Then when the verse starts, it's Dan, the singer, playing guitar, because we had this one moment where we set up multiple amps with multiple gates, these old Furman gates, and we came up with this technique for doing gated guitar, where you'd play the guitar, and the guitar signal would go through gates, and get controlled by just little sine waves turning the gates on and off. And then that signal would go to the amps, and that's how you get that like, really like percussive guitar effect. We had this one moment on this song very early on where it was one performance going through multiple amps with different sort of effects.
How did you
and
split
process.
stuff back then as far as going through different amps? What kind of splitter would you use?
Yeah, I mean, in this case, I had a gentleman make a splitter back then that was an active split, because guitar passive signal doesn't fare well to be split, and it gets loaded down. And so we had an active splitter that would go into the 3 different gate channels, and then we use key inputs from a computer to turn the gates on when we want to create this percussive pattern. And then those 3 outputs went to 3 different amps that all had kind of like different pedals and weird stuff on it. And it's just one guitar performance that he played, but it was like this amazing thing that happened. We could never recreate it. And so even though the song was finished probably 2 years later, we still used that guitar that Dan played. And then right at the end, you hear that really fast run.
Yeah.
That was Jeff Tyson, who ultimately was the guitar player when we went out and toured. So there's 3 different people playing guitar, even in that one little stretch of that song. And I think, that's what it was, the project was about. Like, everything really needed to be very purposeful. There had to be a reason for a part to be there. And it had to sort of reach this level of, being sort of unique and innovative in some way to sort of justify having it be a part of the song. The whole drive for that project was really to try and do something really, really extraordinary and unique and different, and we were trying to innovate in every single direction, If I couldn't play it, then Dan would try it. If Dan couldn't do it, then Jeff would do it. Like, we'd just keep trying stuff until something that we felt was really extraordinary happened.
Were you working on this full time then?
Well, there was a slow migration. So initially what would happen was we built a studio in a garage, and it was a studio that people could come in and buy time in.
Yeah.
And I just came with the studio. I mean, when the studio first opened in the garage, it was $10 an hour.
Nice.
We had an ad in BAM magazine, Bay Area Music Magazine.
Yeah.
And I recorded anything, anybody, whatever.
Any
if
style.
you come in with $10 an hour, I will record you. And I did that tirelessly for years. And so every week we would set aside at least 1 or 2 days to work on the T-Ride music, and the rest of the time I would record other stuff so we could have money come in and have resources to maybe upgrade equipment or pay bills. We used credit cards to buy the equipment that we had, so we had to pay off the credit cards. And then just slowly over time, we were able to shift things so we could do maybe 2 or 3 days a week working on T-Ride stuff, and only have to do 3 or 4 days a week doing outside stuff. And then ultimately, once we got signed, we had an album budget. It was full-time T-Ride all the time.
But this is how you built your reputation as a producer and an engineer. It's through this $10 an hour studio.
Yeah.
Fast forward to, what year was the Third Eye Blind record? 97 or so, something like that?
Yeah, it came out in 97.
So how did you get involved with that?
I mean, both of them were just local bands.
Okay.
In the Bay Area, Northern California. And so what happened was T-Ride made the record, came out. It didn't end up being the biggest record of all time. Significantly less than that.
Right.
We went and toured. We toured for about a year and a half. And, the experience, I think there was very, very high expectations for the record. And I think it's one of the things that gets overlooked a lot in the music industry is that it helps. It's important to make something that I think, offers something of value creatively. To make some great music, that's important. It's more important of when it comes out.
Right.
Timing is so
everything.
important. It really is. You could make the most amazing music ever in the universe. If it comes out at the wrong time, nobody will get a chance to appreciate it.
Well, if this was 92 when T-Ride came out, that record, that's basically when grunge was happening.
Yes.
I mean, you have a lot of influences, but it's a hard rock record.
Yeah, it was a big, extravagant, rock record type production. Influences from like Queen and Def Leppard and all of that kind of like hair bandy stuff.
Yeah.
There was a lot of that in there, and just sort of the imaging of the band fell more into that category. And when people came out, in whatever flannel plaid shirts and like this whole new wave of stuff. Yeah,
it wasn't just grunge. It was STP. It was the Pumpkins. It was all this new alternative music, I guess, if you want to call it that.
Alternative rock exploded right at that time. And there were some people that felt like if we hadn't spent so much time on the record
and put it out
even just a year or two earlier, it could have been a totally different experience.
Yeah.
But as soon as that video came out from Nirvana, it changed
I think
everything.
a lot of people don't even realize when that video came out how it changed the music industry.
It changed everything.
Yeah.
And I remember it when it happened, and we were like, our record was done at that point, and we were about to start going on tour, and we're about to make videos and stuff, and I was like, oh no, we're in big trouble. The record company was scrambling. They hired this guy, Sam Bayer, the person that did that video for Teen Spirit, to do 2 music videos for T-Ride. And if you look at the video, it's the same video. The guy made the same video over and over again for all the bands that he worked with, and it was a great concept. He hired dancers like they had in this Teen Spirit video. And so, our videos had the same thing, and it didn't change anything for us though, I mean, it was just, the timing was not right. You know? So that project kind of wound down, and there was a lot of sort of disillusionment about how that went. A second record did get started, and we got a good ways into it. There's a whole collection of songs that was recorded for the second record. Some of it is leaked out. You can find it out there on YouTube. It's floating around. There is stuff that has never leaked out, and maybe there'll be a chance to put that out there at some point. Some of it I think, was done at the same level as the first record, with the same commitment to trying to do something really unique and extraordinary. Some of it was not. The disillusionment definitely set in at a certain point. The inspiration started to,
wane.
Yeah, a little bit. And so then the best thing for me to do at that time, I ended up, we had one really great client in our studio who was a hip hop artist, this guy named Perez. And so I recorded hip hop music from like 93 all the way into 95 for like 2.5 years. I just did nothing but hip hop music. And it was a great experience for me. He was really cool to work with, and we had a great relationship. He was super fun. His persona was kind of, intimidating as a rap artist, but in the studio, he was just a nerd. We just joke around about Star Trek and The Simpsons all day, So I did that for a while, but realized that as interesting as it was to work on hip-hop music, that was not where my heart was. My passion was really rock music. My favorite band of all time was Led Zeppelin, and I just realized, like, I'm never going to be Dr. Dre. I don't live and breathe this music, and I've learned how to record it. I learned a lot about low end, but if I really want to, build a career for myself, I should do what I'm really passionate about. And so I made I sort of forced that transition to happen, and I told Perez at the time, like, I got to get back to recording rock music. This has been great, and I've been grateful for the experience, but I need to do what I'm passionate about.
Did you have people reaching out to you that were in the local scene?
A little bit. I mean, I had maybe a tiny little reputation of somebody that could record things well. But most of it was just total, just like ad and Bam magazine type stuff of just a band that needs a demo, I started carving out time to work with more rock bands locally, and they were very lean times, I was living off of like microwave burritos from the gas station, kind of lean, But eventually I crossed paths with Smash Mouth, and then I crossed paths with Third Eye Blind. Made demos with them, and with Third Eye Blind, the demos, we did a couple round of demos, and after the second round of demos, they got a record deal, and they signed to Elektra. And Steven very much wanted to, be significantly involved with the production of that record. And I think he felt like with us working together, he could really still, be a producer on that record. And so we did that record together. With Smash Mouth, it was a little different. We did some demos. They didn't quite land a record deal. I just decided, let's just finish a record, and then we'll figure it out after that. And so we finished a record, and in the second round of recording that I did with them, the song Walking on the Sun happened. And when that song happened, We had a finished record. They went and shopped it to record labels in LA. We went to LA to master the record at Bernie Grundman's. And they had a record deal by the time the mastering was done. It happened so fast for them. They had a contact at KROQ, and they went and played that song for their friend there, and the friend was like, I have to play this for Kevin Weatherly right now.
Okay, so for people that don't know who Kevin Weatherly was at the time, it was
Program
KROQ,
director.
Program director of KROQ, which was the most important station
in the 90s.
In the 90s.
Absolutely.
If you were on KROQ.
They made careers with
Right.
that radio station and how it was syndicated.
Okay, so the Smash Mouth, so that would have been what year then?
Both of these records ended up coming out in 97.
97, right?
I recorded the Third Eye Blind record. That record took a long time. We worked on that record off and on for about 6 months. And it was finally done. I finished mixing it right up to Christmas of 96. Both of those albums came out in 97.
Okay, and they were they on Elektra? What record were they on?
Yeah, so Third Eye Blind was on Elektra.
And Smash
Mouth
Mouth
was on Interscope.
Interscope, okay. Yeah. When I had Stephen in here, Stephen Jenkins, we talked about Skywalker Ranch. Was that any part of it, or was
It
that?
was.
It
yeah.
was part of it.
We worked
okay.
at 3 different studios for the
Okay.
first Third Eye Blind record.
Yeah.
So I would say probably the majority of it was done at my studio, which was
Okay.
called Hunk of Shit Recording
Yeah.
at the time. It was
Famous studio.
Yeah, not pretty, but it sounded good.
And what did you have in there? What kind of what were you recording through?
I mean, the equipment was great because I think I just mentioned that we got the record company to give us
Yep.
the album budget. So I bought an 8038 Neve console, had 32 1081s in it. I bought an Ampex MM1200 set up as a 16-track, a
Yep.
Studer 800 24-track.
Man, how big was your deal? That's
We got
lot-
a good deal.
That's a lot
Yeah,
of lot
we
of
had a good
lot
deal.
of gear.
Yeah, the initial album budget was almost $250,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, back when people used
Okay,
to buy
so
records.
you had great stuff.
We had great gear. No excuses.
So was any of the Third Eye Blind record or Smash Mouth record done in using computers? Were you guys using Pro Tools or anything like that, or whatever would have been out at the time, or was it all analog?
Definitely mostly analog.
Okay.
And so there was a transition that happened in there. I was using an early version of Logic Audio when it was still eMagic.
eMagic, that's right.
Before Apple bought it.
Yep.
And so I was using Logic Audio. So any computer stuff that happened on the Third Eye Blind album was Logic Audio. But 95% of what happened on that record was microphone signals going directly to a tape machine.
I'll play a couple things on here.
I'm packed and I'm holding, I'm smiling, she living, she golden, she lives for me. Says she lives for me, ovation, who own motivation. She comes round and she goes down on me, and I'll make you smile like a drug for you. Do ever what you wanna do, coming over you. Keep on smiling, what we go through. One stop to the rhythm that defines you, and I speak to you like the chorus to the verse. Drop another line like a coda with the curse. Coming like a freak show takes the stage. We give them the game, she plays. She say, I want something else to get me through this semi-time kind of life. Baby, baby, I want something else. I'm not listening when you say goodbye.
When you hear this,
Yeah.
do you think that it sounds as good as I think it sounds? It still sounds phenomenal. It's so punchy. The drums, everything about it. The guitars, vocals up front, the mix just
Yeah.
sounds amazing.
Yeah, I still really love the sound of that record. I think since then, 28 years ago, things have sort of changed quite a bit in how people listen to music and the systems that people listen to music on. And so I definitely approach the low end very different now than I did back then. It's the only thing about the mixes on that record to me that I would specifically
Talk
do
about
differently.
that. Talk about how low end has changed and how people listen to music nowadays.
Yeah, well, there were limitations. Often in the past, the limitation was really imposed by vinyl. Putting a lot of low end on vinyl is just technically very difficult. The physics of it don't really allow that. They've, modernized it a bit, and they've gotten better at it for sure. But that was a huge limitation early on. You just couldn't cut it, the vinyl.
And people didn't use subwoofers like they do nowadays.
No.
There just was not
Yeah, and
in 1997.
yeah,
It's like,
and there was this whole era of like the Oratone era,
right.
Which
Explain what that is.
the Oratone was this very lo-fi speaker that everybody would have in every studio, and you'd only have one of it, and and just in the middle, propped up on top of your console, so you could switch to it and hear what it would sound like coming over a little like crappy mono stereo in your car. Car stereos used to not be anything like what they are now.
Right.
Or coming over an AM radio or coming over the TV, because so much of how people experience music was in that context. And so you had to make sure that it would translate in that way.
On every kind of speaker system, whatever it was.
Yes. And so, most people were listening to music on very lo-fi systems, and that's completely changed now.
Yeah.
People have access to very, very hi-fi, very full-range monitoring systems, whether it's earbuds, headphones, home stereo systems, your car now, like all of it, you get to hear all the frequencies.
Yeah.
And so that means we get to use all the frequencies. And that's changed a lot in the last 28 years. So
if you were to remix this, you would change the way that you approached the low end.
And I did just remix this.
Okay.
Because I did an episode about this song on my website, the Audioaut Institute thing. Stephen and I got together and went through and did a production deconstruction of the whole thing, talked about how all of it was recorded and all of our recollections of all that stuff. And part of what I love about revisiting these songs is having an opportunity to take everything that I've learned in the last 28 years and see if it actually makes a difference, And so I remixed the song on my current setup, which is a hybrid setup. I have a beautiful pair of it's best monitoring I've ever had in my life, And like for me, the results when I was done pulling this up and remixing it, it sounds way better to me now, So I think there are things that can be improved about that. There are things about that mix that I really love. It does have an edginess to it and this kind of like bratty energy in it that I really like. And when I remixed it and kind of just expanded the sonics on it in every direction, the low end's bigger and clearer and punchier and, all of that stuff. It did sort of pretty it up in a way. Mm-hmm. And I suppose if I probably worked on it longer, I could probably try to recapture some of the brattiness in there. But yeah, it's very interesting to revisit that stuff,
Give me some particulars that you remember recording the drums. I know you do stuff differently all the time from record to record.
We're just like insatiably curious. I'm always
But you take notes of everything, right? And you keep them.
Yeah.
You probably have all the notes from this session.
Yeah, I have a whole notebook on this project.
Okay, so from your recollection, what would be the drum setup as far as your drum recording for this?
So on this project, I was renting microphones, and this became sort of a staple for me in this whole time period. So whether it was, Smash Mouth, Third Eye Blind, ultimately into like Good Charlotte and All American Rejects, like all these projects used a very similar sort of drum approach. It was like the big rock drum thing. And so overheads were C12s that I never owned. I rented them from this friend of mine, this guy, Stephen Jarvis. He had a beautiful pair of C12s that were just massive sounding. It was capture the whole drum
Explain what
kit.
C12s are.
So AKG made these beautiful tube condenser mics. They probably first came out in the 60s. And it's a long, skinny microphone, side address, 1-inch, large diaphragm condenser. They're one of the early microphones that was really full range.
Yes.
Like beautiful, they actually had a little bit of a push in the high end, so they sort of would actually, brighten up the high end in a beautiful way, but like amazing low end. And so you get the whole picture, this big, beautiful sound out of those things. Just very silky high end.
Would you try and capture the drum kit with the overheads, or with these more cymbal mics?
It was the whole drum kit.
Okay.
I've always been a big believer in that, that the close mics are more for creating the sensation of punch. Mm-hmm. But the sound of the drum kit comes from microphones that are further away. Nobody listens to the snare drum like that.
Right.
It's a terrible sound. And so I try to not lean on the close mics to create a drum sound. And so those are just add definition and punch, and the sound comes from, I have stereo overheads, I have a mono drum kit mic in front, I have a mono room mic, I have stereo room mics, like lots of things that are further away from the drums that give you, the experience of what those drums sound like in the room. That's always been important to me. So on this setup, C12's on top. I had a pair of C12.
As a spaced pair, or would you do a
I'm
XY?
more XY. I like the phasing tightness of having the capsules closer together.
Explain why you like that.
Because when the mics are separated more, just because of their orientation to the drum kit, their orientation to elements in the room, like walls that you might be close to, all of those things, will dramatically affect the frequency response of those two mics. And so then you don't get as much of a focal center for the snare drum. And I actually take a tape measure and measure it off to each of the mics.
To make sure the diaphragms are the same distance.
Same distance from the snare drum, and I try and make that the center focus. And so when those mics are maybe 6 inches apart, something like that, and just aimed out, so this one is going to be hearing more of the left side of the drum kit, and this one's hearing more of the right side of the drum kit, you still get this center punch of the snare drum when you turn them both up. And you can have them panned all the way out, and they still are very focused sounding in the middle. If you put mics out like this, the snare drum just sounds like it's been split in half.
Right, because it has.
Yeah. It's not my thing. I'm sure there's ways to make it work, but not my favorite.
What would the close mic setup be typically?
Yeah, so the rest of it, I had a pair of C12As. I love C12As on toms. So I'd do a C12A on the rack tom. If there's 2 floor toms, I would split a C12A on the floor toms. I'd always put a mic on the bottom of the floor toms to be able to enhance the low end on the floor toms. I usually blended those mics together and printed them together on one track. It's all going to tape, limited tracks. I had to conserve a little bit.
The C12As are like a 414 looking microphone.
Yes. Yeah, it was
but
sort
has
of
a C12 capsule in it.
Yep, CK12 capsule, and it was that evolution from the C12 to the 414.
Now, were those your mics?
Yeah, those ones I own.
And when people hit them, did you freak out or not?
Those ones, I bought those in a pawn shop.
Oh,
I
man.
found them in a pawn shop and had somebody build a power supply, and I made cables for them from scratch. I mean, but they always sounded amazing.
Yeah.
So those were on toms. I love those on toms. I was very fond of having a Coles 4038 as the mono kit mic. And so I'd always try and place that sort of in between the toms and the floor toms, looking in at the snare drum. So it was never like right in front of the kit, because whenever I did that, there was too much rack tom and not enough floor tom. So I always moved it off this way and move it in. I always have to, drummers always hated this with me when I'm like, you're gonna have to move that ride cymbal.
Oh man.
The ride cymbal, like putting the ride cymbal right in the middle of the drum kit always drove me crazy.
Yeah.
I actually want to hear it more off to the side, and so then it gets picked up better, but
You deal with what you whatever
you
the people
make it
can.
work. Yeah, so most people were very accommodating. Sometimes people were like, no way, man, I can't play my ride cymbal over there, So then, Coles 4038, often a pair of U87s for room mics. Those are mics that I own.
And how far back would they be in your space?
Yeah, it depended on the what we were going for, but
I mean, was this in a garage still, or how big was the studio?
Hunk of Shit was a big room.
Okay.
And so this was a big, huge warehouse.
Okay.
And with a relatively small control room. And I was actually able to divide the room up into two different spaces, one that was a little smaller and drier and one that was bigger and more open. But, this is a space, big tall ceiling. The ceiling was probably, 16, 20 feet.
Great.
And the main sort of recording space for drums was probably roughly 40 by 40, something like that. It's
a big space.
Big space,
yeah.
Early on, I was obsessed with Led Zeppelin and like those big, booming room sound on drums. And it's like, I need a big room, So we were always chasing that. And I always like having the room mics being more diffused sounding. And so cardioid pattern, but facing away from the drums, or having like a gobo in between the drums. So they're not getting direct signal from the drums. When you get that, it gets too blurry for me, where you hear this hard slap from the drums of just that delay of the initial sound of the drums hitting a mic that's 20 feet away. You get this 20 millisecond, like really hard reflection of the drums. It always got too blurry. So face it away, and you get this soft, diffused room sound that you can blend in that doesn't mess with the detail of the attack of the drums. So often there was that. I always did a kick room mic. So there would be a mic where I just find a place in the room. It could be 6 feet, 10 feet away, where it was just grabbing a very cool low end for the kick drum, and then often that would get go through a gate that was keyed from the close mic on the kick drum, so it would open when the kick drum hits.
Would you ever isolate the kick drum with
baffles and stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Especially the cymbals, the age-old cymbal battle. The cymbals.
Explain this for people that are watching this that don't know what we're talking about here.
Yeah, so cymbals are the worst thing in the universe for your drum room sound.
Right.
And so typically, very loud. It depends on the balance, the internal balance of the drummer that's playing. I was constantly having to go like, can you play the cymbals a little softer all the time? Because, you want to put a lot of compression on the room sound to sort of draw out the decay of it, make it sound more explosive, pull all of that cool room ambience closer to your face. And somebody hits a cymbal and it's just like, it's like it's all you hear.
This is one of the things about John Bonham that people don't appreciate, how Bonham would internally mix his drumming, and he would not bash on the cymbals.
Definitely not.
The drummers have to really balance themselves.
Yep.
And not bash the cymbals.
Yeah, if you watch him play, the cymbals go, they just barely tilt when he hits them.
Yeah.
He's very, very careful how he hits the cymbals.
Okay, so you would put packing blankets over the bass drum.
Yeah, I had a variety of things. There were like these acoustic panels that never got mounted to a wall, and so I built baffles out of those that I would strategically place just in front of the cymbals, and it would just tame the cymbals in the room mics. Made it a little easier. I could just have, 20-30% more of the room mics without it just overwhelming with, the blend with cymbals. So.
And would you have a kick in and kick out mic?
I generally don't put a kick mic inside the kick drum. That, again, just not a sound that is very familiar for me. Nobody listens to a kick drum with their head inside the kick drum.
Right.
But in this era, I did often, there would be a resonant side head, but I'd put a small hole in it. And so use either like a 421, I had a Audio-Technica ATM 25 that I really liked, that I would just aim inside the kick drum. So it doesn't get that weird sort of like basketball sound. Yeah. It's outside of the drum. And then a mic that's just on the resonant head, and that would be usually a 47 FET, something like that. Mm-hmm. The kick room mic was, I had a 47 tube mic. That was great for that.
Would you compress anything going to tape at that time, or
no?
Everything would just be microphone, mic pre, onto tape?
Yeah, I generally did not compress to tape. I almost never did that. I like the sound of, when you print something to a tape machine that has a huge transient impact on it, the tape machine softens it a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of that transient gets shaved off by the tape machine, and I would use compression to restore it. And what you get when you restore it is so good.
Right.
It's like, it re-emphasizes where that punch happens. Instead of it being this like really bright, clicky, pinched sound when you compress it, it's this amazing, like low, guttural, punchy sound because the tape machine has smoothed off that really bright, clicky transient. And so, it's so disorienting for me to try and process drums that didn't go through a tape machine. They don't take EQ or compression in the way I was used to, and it's like, none of this works anymore, Do
you have a tape machine in your studio now?
Absolutely, I got 4 of them.
A lot of people say, oh, you can't hear any difference between tape and digital nowadays.
Yeah.
What do you say about that?
Well, there's a huge difference, and the difference is really that tape machines are fucking up the sound in a wonderfully musical way, and digital is not. And that was the thing that was so confusing for me early on when I first started working more with digital recording. My misconception early on was that there's something about this digital recording that's bad, that's messing up the sound. Because I'd try and EQ things and I'd try and compress things, like, none of this works. Try and boost high end, it sounds harsh. Like, what happened? What's going on? It must be messing up the sound. But it wasn't messing up the sound.
That was the problem.
Yes, it's vastly more accurate. But what the tape machines do to the sound is so beautiful. It really brings out a lot of really incredible musicality in the sound. It sort of rebalances the harmonics on what you're recording. So transient spikes, transient peaks get converted from a narrow collection of frequencies that are really loud for a very brief moment, and it spreads them out over all these harmonic overtones that gives this sensation of it being brighter, but more pleasing on the ear at the same time. Digital always had this quality to me of like being dull and harsh at the same time. Right. It's like, nicely done, digital. Great job on that dull, harsh thing, And, tape machines are an amazing antidote for that. And, for me, it makes the process a lot easier. Things just fall into place way, way easier.
Now, will you go to tape and record and then dump it into the computer after, or no? Or do you just work on tape?
Yeah, so I've settled on a workflow to still incorporate the tape machines that I'm really enjoying. I've done all the last, 2, maybe 3 records that I've done with this workflow. And I think it really optimizes what is great about the computer and what is great about the tape machine. And it's really mostly just incorporating the sound of the tape machine and not having to work on the tape machine, which is a huge commitment. Like, especially now, people don't understand what that experience is and how unforgiving it really is. And, like, you play something on there, and it's like, that's it. That's what you got. So we can't slide it. We can't tune it. We can't edit it. That's it. That's what you did. And people don't understand that. So what I do is, I have a setup now where all the mic preamps go directly into my computer. And so I capture raw, totally unprocessed mic preamp signals. Mm-hmm. And then they come back out of, a D to A converter. And they normalize in my patch bay to all of my outboard analog stuff. So they'll go to analog EQs and compressors, and then that chain normalizes to the inputs of my tape machine. And then the output of the tape machine goes to another set of analog to digital converters and recaptures that same sound, having gone through the tape machine and all of my analog gear. So ultimately what I have in my computer is the raw mic pre-signals and the fully analog, processed version. And typically the workflow goes where I'll record everything just listening digital. I'll monitor through the tape machine on input, and I can be getting some of my analog gear settings and stuff. But then ultimately, I complete capturing the performance without ever starting the tape machine. And I'll do the comp, whatever, pick the best from a few takes or whatever the circumstances are. And once I have all that right, then I can hit play on the computer and have it go through the tape machine. Tape machine goes and record, signals coming off the repro head, and I can dial everything in perfect. While the band goes and has lunch, they can go and hang out. And it actually eliminates all of that stress of like, is this compression setting right? Did I make it too bright? Like all of those things when you're in the moment, and I'm trying to really be attentive to the creative
performance
energy,
and things like that.
And the performances and the sort of the mental state of the musicians, and not torturing them with like, okay, I have to try another compressor on the snare drum or whatever. I don't torture them with that. We can really focus on the performance. All I have to do is just make sure that I'm getting a good signal from the microphone itself. Like, I know this is going to sound good. And then go through and really sort of like pre-mix things.
So this is how you do things now, right? In 1997, you're on tape for most of this, right? So as you're mixing it, all the drums come back into what console? Your Neve console with the 1081s. Are you using compression? Do you have automation on the console, or are you mixing by hand?
The Third Eye Blind album was mostly mixed at a studio called The Site in Marin in California. Yep. And so they had this beautiful Neve console. They took two 8068s and spliced them together. And so it was a 64-channel Neve console, and that had 31102s, which are the sort of later version of their four-band EQ. Yeah. It had GML automation. And so the Third Eye Blind record was mixed on that console, except for one song. The song Burning Man was mixed on my 8038. Mm-hmm. And the 8038 had NECAM automation. Okay. I don't know if you remember that. Oh, yeah. Very, very early automation system. Used these giant oversized floppy disks and stuff. Didn't really work. Like, it was,
like a lot of stuff back then.
It was just a clever idea that never really worked that well. And so like Burning Man, we did the thing where it was a multi-person mix. And so it was me and a couple of band members on the console. We all had notes of like at what time we do what move, and there were marks on the faders. And so you'd let the song play, and there'd be one person over here that would be like pushing up the guitar in one spot, and I'd be doing vocal rides here and there, and it was like a performance, you know? And so the song Burning Man was mixed that way. And I remember on that song, I used kind of a peculiar compressor on the compression for the whole mix. It was this thing called the Lala. It was a recreation of a LA2A, stereo LA2A. And I needed two different settings, one setting for the verse and a setting for the chorus, so it didn't over-compress the chorus.
This is like a custom-made thing that you got from somewhere?
Yeah, it was a company called Eclair Engineering.
Yeah.
They made this, you probably heard of the direct box called the Evil Twin.
Yes, of course.
Yes, same company. And so on that mix, one of my notes was I had to jump away from the console and go and turn down the compression on the choruses to make sure it didn't over-compress the chorus. And so... Okay,
so like on Semi-Charmed, at the site, what would you use as the mix bus compressor?
I had an Allen Smart, VCA SSL style compressor.
Yep.
And so that song, we were specifically going for that sound.
Mm-hmm.
And so I used that as the overall mix bus compression, not super aggressive, probably just a couple dB of compression. Because there's a lot of compression on the individual instruments, a lot of compression on the drums.
Yeah.
I had a whole stack of distressors, and so I at that point I think I owned 4 and rented an extra pair, and so I would use a distressor on the kick drum, on the snare drum, on the toms, and then a pair of distressors on the whole drum mix.
Okay.
So it was just multiple layers of distressing.
Which gives it the punchiness.
Yeah.
It's so punchy sounding.
Yeah, that box is so good when you set the attack to the slowest position, like all the way at 10, and then the release relatively fast, you can just murder drums with it, and it gets so punchy in the best way. It's one of those compressors that emphasizes the lower frequencies in the punchiness of it.
The thing that I love about it too is the vocal, where the vocal sits. It's really in your face. It's very aggressive sounding, but not obnoxious sounding.
Then and still now, I have this one original, Blackface 1176, one of the most magical.
Same one?
It's the same one. Yeah, I've had it this whole time. It's just a magical vocal compressor. You can put anything on there. I've had moments with that thing on the Nickel Creek record where Chris was singing a particular song. He was struggling with singing the part because it was a very soft part, and I was compressing his voice with that compressor. And at a point in the tracking process, I was like, let's try this. And just cranked up the compression. He's like, oh my God, I can hear the back of my throat in my headphones.
Right.
And it was so inspiring for him. It made the performance.
Another song that I asked Stephen about was this.
Oh yeah.
Summertime and the wind is blowing outside in Lower Chelsea, and I don't know what I'm doing in this city. The sun is always in my eyes. It crashes through the windows and I'm sleeping on the couch. When I came to visit you, that's when I knew that I could never have you.
Love the bass playing in there.
Orion, so good.
I mean, it's so creative here.
Amazing bass player.
Like there's always been. I've never been so alone.
Also, it's
never been
not
so alive.
It's just kind of hidden back there, and then it's brought out a little more here. It's like perfect blend, and then the electric comes in there.
Motorcycle drive by, the cigarette ash flies in your eyes, and you don't mind. You smile and say the world it doesn't fit with you. I don't believe you. You're so serene, careening through the universe. Your axis on until
I love all those little background effects there that are going on, whatever that is.
That's Kevin with slide, just drenched in reverb. Him floating around back there.
When you have a song like that that's a build up until the band when they just come in full on, do you consciously keep the mix bus down and make sure that you have room to have have it build but not be too quiet in the intro?
When I'm mixing a song like this,
Yeah.
I start with the loudest part.
Okay, and then you set everything for that, right?
Yes, because invariably, if you start with the quietest thing and get a healthy level, by the time you get to the place where it was all the meter, and you have to adjust everything. So I always start with the loudest part, and then it's very easy to, place volumes leading into that, and you're not going to have to basically redo the entire gain structure of your mix when the band comes in. So yeah, definitely that was the approach on that.
So back then, did you use clicks all the time when you're recording the tape?
Yeah, for some of these songs, it's a combination of both on this project. There were clicks on some of this. There's some of them there was not. So like the beginning, this intro section of this song, this is one where we did use a computer. That acoustic guitar part is Steven playing, and it was so naked, and we really wanted it to be perfect.
Yeah.
And so the computer allowed us to be able to just play in sections and really get it right and be able to crossfade between takes.
Yeah.
And never have the acoustic guitar take you out of the moment,
Right.
To stay in this beautiful...
And something like a buzz string or something like that would take you out of the moment.
It could, a really loud squeak or
Yes.
a note that's buzzing or sounding weird. And so we want to keep all of that out of there. So you're just left with this vocal, to focus on. So we did use a computer for that performance, and then ultimately printed it on the analog master to pair up with everything else. The other thing that was interesting about this song was, Steven, I don't know if you mentioned it in your interview with him, but he always wanted to be a drummer. That was really his first love. He initially had no interest in being a singer. He just wanted to be a drummer in a band. And so he plays drums on this record. And so he plays all these drums in the beginning, the cymbal that comes in, and there's this little pattern that comes in where he's playing with blastics. That's Steven playing. And so then ultimately, I think he was going to play the whole song, but when it got to the big rock part, I think we all agreed that he was working with this drummer. He wasn't officially in the band at this time, but this drummer named Michael Urbano was an amazing session drummer. And he always played this song incredibly. I wasn't really aware of that because he wasn't playing in the band at that time, but Steven was like, we should just have Michael come in and play this. And so we made arrangements to have him come in and play, set up a drum kit. I always had tons of drum sets at the studio, did my miking setup like I described, same thing. And he came in and he knew the song. He had been playing in the band in the past. And I was like, okay, cool, let's just, run it down, hit record, and that part comes in where all of a sudden the drums just, and he just crushed this part. I had no time to set any levels, anything. He starts playing, every meter goes all the way to the right. The performance was so good, I had to keep it. And so the drums on that song were first take, one pass, no punches, everything distorting like crazy on the tape machine. But
the drums on this have more of a room drum.
Yes.
From what I remember, I'll go to the spot.
It's this really cool fill in here.
Oh, I know the one.
With the hi-hat and snare.
Great.
There it is. Check it out.
Okay, so I always thought, to me, this has a very Larry Mullen Jr. kind of U2 drum.
Yeah.
His style, kind of aggressive.
Yeah,
Quarter
eighth notes on the kick drum.
Yeah, eighth notes on the kick drum. I love the sound of the drums, the crunchiness of them on this. So that's why.
That's why. Yeah, I mean, they're distorting like crazy. But I find with things can be very distorted, and when you compress them after the distortion, it refocuses the sound, and you can get away with a lot of distortion, you know.
When this record came out, did you have an idea that this was going to be this massively big record? Well, both records, the Smash Mouth record.
Yeah, I didn't really. You know, like my only experiences with putting out records was really mostly the T.I. record, which was not
so
massively successful.
That's why I asked. Was it kind of like, wow, I can't believe that something is...
Yeah, I mean, it was shocking. And I have to say, like, there were things about the Third Eye Blind record that I did really connect with. You know, songs like Background and God of Wine, and those songs were like, this is an incredible song.
Yeah,
and
great.
Really, you know, I connected with emotionally in the time that we were working on them. There were times working on God of Wine that was like, you know, people had like
Love
tears in their eyes, you know.
Yeah.
So powerful. But the song Semi-Charmed Life, like, I was really like,
That was
really?
not your thing.
Dude, like that's what we're doing? Okay. I thought it wasn't cool at all. It shows what I know. And so I didn't really have a sense of that. I know everybody else around it, you know, the record company, the A&R person, the manager, this is going to be the biggest thing of all time, you know. Everybody was very, very convinced. And I was just there to make stuff sound cool, you know. Try and make, you know, something that was really musical and meaningful for people. And the Smash Mouth thing, like the song Walking on the Sun, that was really an aside for them. They were a ska band when we first got together. And that song was sort of an anomaly for them. And when we were doing pre-production at their rehearsal space, and they were kind of like, you know, we got this song, we think it might be cool, we're not really sure what to do with it. And, you know, I don't know, if you think it might be good, we could do it, but, you know, we're not sure about it. And they played me the demo of the song. I was like, okay.
Okay, so let's...
Recipe. This is a love attack. I know when our body's back, it's just like any fad. It retracts before impact, and just like fashion, it's a passion for the withered and hip. If you got the goods, they'll come and buy it just to stay in the clique. So don't delay, act now. Supplies are running out. Allow if you're still alive. 6 to 8 years to arrive, and if you follow them, maybe out tomorrow. But if you might as well be walking on the sun.
Okay, so these are recorded roughly at the same time. Was your approach different? Obviously, the music between the two bands is very different.
Yeah, the Smash Mouth stuff, mostly, this song being the exception, was mostly recorded more live.
Okay.
And so definitely drums, bass, guitar. We'd do a pass of that, and you'd really have sort of the foundation of the song. It was a very simple band. You know, it was just a 4-piece band. Singer, drums, bass, guitar. That was it. And then in the studio, I played keyboards on stuff. So I played, you know, organ and farfisa on this song, and did some other stuff on some of the other songs. That got added in the process of just sort of figuring out their sound. And but yeah, I mean, the Smash Mouth record was recorded in 10 days. And the Third Eye Blind record was done over a course of 6 months. You know,
wow.
Very, very different processes.
But they came out and they were both successful right around the same time.
They were. And that was sort of the odd thing, is that there was so much buildup. You know, working on the Third Eye Blind record, getting it done at the end of '96, and then, as I'm sure you're aware, you know, like there's a setup time to release a record, and so they went through that process. And so even though the record was delivered, you know, right at the end of '96. It took 4 months for them to set up to release that record. There's all kinds of promo.
Explain this for people that don't know, because this is a thing of the past, setup time for records.
Yeah, so it was the time that was needed to get all of the artwork together, to get videos together, to get all the promotional material, and start leaking out information. So a record doesn't come out absolutely nowhere.
Like it does now.
Especially for Third Eye Blind. That was their first record.
Yeah.
Nobody knew who they were. They didn't have like a huge local following. They played some shows in San Francisco, but they didn't have like they weren't touring across the country and doing that stuff. And so the record company needs time to start sending out this music to all of the various, music magazines and places, anywhere you could to get the word out about the band. It takes time to do that. And so when the record comes out, there's some anticipation and expectation for the record. Obviously, a single comes out first to introduce the sound of the band, try and get that on the radio, and then when the album comes out, so you can try and sell some records when it comes out.
Now, were both these bands on K-Rock early?
They were. And so, and it was very different for Smash Mouth. So that thing happened that I mentioned where we went to master the record. They had a record deal by the time we were done mastering the record. And Kevin Weatherly was like, I'm going to start playing Walking on the Sun right now. Right. He wanted to play it that night. And the record company, Interscope, is, please don't do that.
Right. Although you don't want to step on the enthusiasm of the record, of the
but can you
program
please
director.
wait? Like we need time. We just signed the band yesterday.
Yeah.
Can you please let us set up this record a little bit? But things happened in sort of the normal timeline for Third Eye Blind. They happened wildly accelerated for Smash Mouth, and so those songs ended up coming out at the same time.
Right.
And it was a totally surreal transition in my life. I went from total obscurity working out of hunk of shit studios to having, Walking on the Sun and Semi-Charmed Life competing for number one on radio play at the same time.
That's when I became aware of you, is right then.
Yeah.
I was like, who's this Eric Valentine guy?
Yeah.
He's on both these records.
Yeah, it was a crazy time.
Did you get a producer manager at the time? Or,
they all called me.
Everybody, right?
Every one of them. Yeah, it was just totally surreal. Because for me it was like I didn't do anything really different on those records. All the other stuff that I recorded around that same time sounds like those records. It's the same degree of whatever sonics.
But stylistically, and the songs are totally different.
Yes, but as far as the engineering and the mixing, I didn't really do anything that different.
Where did you mix that?
The Smash Mouth records was mixed at Hunk of Shit.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was all mixed there. I still love saying that.
Lovingly referred to it as that, right?
Yes.
Was it actually listed that way?
It's credited as HOS.
Okay.
Yeah. You'll see it on there. It's on all those records.
So was All Star on that same record?
It wasn't.
It was on the next record, right?
All Star was on the follow-up. Yeah, for Smash Mouth.
Which was a massive hit as well.
Yeah, that one found its way.
Well, let me play All Star so that people know what I'm talking about. Everybody knows this song. Everyone knows this song.
I ain't the sharpest tool in the shed. She was looking kind of dumb with her finger.
Where did you record this, Eric? Oh my God.
Well, the years start coming and they don't stop coming. Fed to the rules and I hit the ground running. Didn't make sense not to live for fun. Your brain gets smart but your head gets dumb. So much to do, so much to see. So what's wrong with taking the back streets? You'll never know if you don't go. You'll never shine if you don't glow. Hey now, you're an all-star. Get your game on, go play. Hey now, you're a rock star. Get the show on, get paid. And all that glitters is gold. Only shooting stars break the mold.
Okay, this is a couple years later. How did your approach change at all? Did you get any new gear now that you were kind of the hot guy on the block and you had?
Yeah, I did. In there, along the way, I did swap out the Neve console.
Okay.
So I sold the 8038, which was amazing for tracking,
Yep.
but was not great for mixing. Nicam automation, only 32 channels. I had two 2-inch machines. Typically, my projects were 40 tracks, so there was a 16-track master and a 24-track master that synced together.
Yep.
I literally didn't have enough channels on my console, and so I sold the 8038, a little bit with a tear in my eye, and got a Neve 8128, which was, a very sort of uncelebrated Neve console along the way. People sort of know it because it had this weird bus assignment matrix that looked like you were ordering food at McDonald's, you know? And it was a very, very different thing than the 80 series Neve console. It was all IC op amps in it. It had none of the discrete Class A circuitry, all that stuff.
Why did you buy that? Just out of curiosity.
Because I could mix on it.
Okay.
And I wanted to mix. And so,
what would you do tracking wise? Did you have? Would you track through that as well, or did you?
I was able to sell that console, but not sell all of the modules.
There you
and
go.
So I saved, a bunch of the 1081 modules. So I had 14 channels of the original Class A.
Perfect.
Stuff. Yeah.
You wanted to keep enough to record drums and basic tracks through and stuff.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
Explain why. Talk about Neve, about tracking versus mixing.
Tracking for me, the early Neve stuff, the whole basis for Rupert Neve's design approach was very transformer driven. And so he loved transformers, what they did to be able to handle the signal as it traveled through different parts of the console and getting in and out of the electronics of whatever it was, the mic pre or equalizer, whatever. Lots of transformers. So more than any other stuff, Neve is the sound of transformers, and beautifully done.
Yes.
And so it has a pretty strong sonic footprint to it, The transformers, they sort of thicken up the low end and add this kind of beautiful, silky smear to the high end in a way. It's just that same thing, that sort of softening of the sound that ultimately makes things kind of sound bigger in a way. Because at the end of the day, it's just distortion that we're talking about, just a specific type of it. And transformers do it in a way where it adds color and sort of size, harmonic richness without losing the punch. Neves are incredibly punchy, but
I always would say they make things sound better than they actually sound.
Yeah, it's true. It's adding things to the sound, And so those early 80 series modules are incredible. So we're talking about, 1081s, 1073s, 1084s, which was really my favorite because that was the one that was still Class A but had a little more flexibility with the EQ. Those things were incredible to track through. They really did enhance the sound. When it goes through that thing, it's like, whoa, I'm good at this, you know?
Okay, so this is something that people don't know. You have your own audio company under, we'll talk about it. You tell about it.
Yeah, well, I'll finish the thing about the Neve. So those are great to track with. The EQs are very broad brush, so you can't do very surgical things with those early EQs.
Right.
So the later Neve console that I got, the equalizers were much more surgical, and I had more channels, better for mixing.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's been sort of a common formula for a lot of folks. In most of the time, it would be track on an 80 series Neve, mix on an SSL.
Yeah. SSL, which has compressors on every channel, gates,
lots of
EQs,
control, lots of
lot of
flexibility.
control in the EQs, things like that. I'm asking you a lot of technical questions because you're incredibly knowledgeable about gear, and you have your own mic pre's, EQs, compressors.
Yeah, there was a point along the way, and it was really sort of my journey with Neve stuff. So I had that original 80 series Neve. I got an 8128 Neve that I mixed on. I used that thing up. I used it until it was at the end of its lifespan. Okay. And so that console I used all the way through, the Smash Mouth stuff. I'm trying to think, Queens of the Stone Age, Nickel Creek, all into the early 2000s. And then there was a certain point where there was just no amount of contact cleaner that was ever going to make me trust that console ever again. Yep. There's too many moments where signals would just cut out, and I'm like, so had to get rid of that. I got a brand new Neve 88R, very expensive purchase, and sadly did not love that console. It's an incredible console. They did an amazing job designing that thing. When they were trying to design something that would work in a recording studio, but also on a film scoring stage and all of this stuff, and it just had so much stuff in it that I didn't need. And so ultimately, it really wasn't the right choice for me. And then I was like, then what do I do, And so I'd been working with this studio tech, this guy named Larry Jasper, that was inconceivably brilliant. Like, I just never encountered anybody like this guy. He had sort of committed to memory all of the schematics for all of the vintage equipment that everybody loves and uses. Anything that you pointed at in the room, well, there's an LA2A limousine. Oh yeah, that's this, and a bootstrapping thing with a whatever transistor, blah blah, on and on and on. And he was always right about everything. And so I'd been through the process of him sort of, fixing and modifying my equipment, and did some amazing, stuff with my gear. And so he emboldened me to go like, let's just make our own console, and not realizing how naive of a thought that was. But we ended up doing it, and it took a long time. We started the process in 2007, and started by designing an amplifier block, our own version of like an amplifier, the like BA-183, which is one of the amplifier blocks in a Neve module, or the 2520, which is in an API. Like everybody has their sort of like their thing. It's the engine that makes all this audio stuff work. And so we started there, and then just, started designing an equalizer and a busing system and all of that stuff. So by 2009, we had built a console that I installed in my studio at Barefoot Recording. This is once I had moved to Southern California.
Was this Undertone? Is that what that was at the time, or no?
It wasn't a company. I was just going to build a console for myself. But there are things about it, particularly the equalizer, was so unique.
It's the same equalizer like I have in there, similar,
Yes,
right?
It's the same thing. That's a 3-band version. The console had a 4-band version.
You have the notch filtering and all this stuff that's just brilliant in it. There's so much detail that you can address with this.
Yeah, the original version, analog Class A equalizer, that was every bit as powerful as a plug-in. There was really nothing like it. And now the plugins have actually sort of caught up to things that equalizer does that nothing was doing. And so it was unique enough, and people were curious enough about it, that I thought, I don't know, maybe other people might want this stuff too. We started Undertone Audio. From then, the console thing, the consoles were a big task to build. They were all custom built.
Yep.
We built 8 consoles. They got sold to various people around the world. There's, still one in, probably a couple in England. There's one now in Brazil. They're around various places.
Is this what you still use, this console?
I don't mix on a console anymore.
Okay.
Yeah, I moved on from that.
So this company made consoles.
Yep.
And then you made
rack mount gear, which is, for obvious reasons, makes much more sense in contemporary context. There are not many people that are still chasing down working on consoles, and I followed that same path. I love that console. If I was ever going to work on an analog console, that's unquestionably the one I would choose. But it didn't make sense for me anymore. Like to have this giant thing sitting in front of me. Yeah, it just felt totally unnecessary. And so
you also did a recreation of the Fairchild compressor.
Yeah, we made the
Unfairchild. And what made you partake in that?
That was totally random. There was another tech in Southern California, this guy named Garin Avetissian, that he would service my tube equipment. He was really, really...
Did you have a Fairchild at the time or no?
I never bought a Fairchild.
Okay.
Could never justify it.
Yeah.
Never made sense to me.
Explain to people what Fairchilds are that don't know.
Yeah, so Fairchilds originally came out in the late 50s, continued through the 60s, and became sort of like the go-to high-end compressor, whether you were tracking in the studio. It was really the Beatles that sort of discovered what that thing could really do, and how you could not just use it for technical controlling of levels, but actually use it as a creative, enhancement of the sound. And they've just mashed things through a Fairchild and did amazing things. So people started to discover that, but they're a very complicated device in certain ways, and kind of difficult to maintain. They got very rare and became insanely expensive. Even like in the 90s, around that time, they were like, $12,000, $13,000, $15,000 for a 670, a stereo unit. Now I see them for like $100,000.
Oh yeah.
Certainly now there is no compressor on this planet that is worth $100,000.
No, there is not.
Maybe as an investment, but not as a tool to use in the studio.
No.
And those things, I rented them at times. I went to studios and used them at times, and it was like, it's cool.
Yeah.
But depending on the health of the tubes or how well it was maintained, there was ones I plugged in. It was like, I wouldn't put this on my fucking hi-hat mic. This has no place on my mix at all. It sounds terrible. And so I couldn't justify it. And they're somewhat limited. It's a beautiful sound.
It does its thing.
It has 6 presets.
Yeah.
And if one of those doesn't get you where you need to go, then you've got whatever, $100,000 doorstop that's not getting used on your mix. And I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And so this guy, Garen, he made a recreation of a Fairchild in his garage and brought it in. And I was blown away. Like, it looked like a Fairchild. I was like, man, Garen, you made a Fairchild. And he originally did it with a different tube because the tubes that the original Fairchild was using were out of production. Nobody was making them, and those got wildly expensive. Those were anywhere from $500 to $1,000 a tube.
And how many tubes are in those things?
8 tubes. So you're potentially looking at $8,000 to retube this thing.
Yeah, just to retube.
And by the way, it was originally designed to burn through those tubes in about a year, less than a year. Because originally those tubes were dollars.
Yeah.
They were maybe $2, $3, $4, $5, something, That all changed. Nothing about that device made any sense to me. And so when Garen made a version that worked off of 6 BC8s, another Varimu tube that was in huge supply, you could get them at surplus places all over the place for $1. And sounds great. It's a little more aggressive sounding than a 6386. 6386 a little smoother, a little more gentle in the knee that it has, but it was a cool sounding compressor. And so he made one, and then I thought, okay, this is cool. We should just build some of these. And so we built up 10 of those original ones just in the sound room at my studio. We set up tables and had an assembly line and just did the wiring harnesses and just built them up. And there's a handful of people out there that have those version 1 Unfairchilds that use the 6 PC8s. They're very, very cool boxes. And so then we realized building these by hand is not practical.
Right.
And the 6 PC8 tubes were a little bit unreliable. They were all decades old, and I could see the writing on the wall that and 6 BC8 tubes are also not being made anymore.
Right.
And so there's going to be a limit to this, and it'll be unsupportable at a certain point. Not long after that, the company JJ started making 6386s again. And so we rebooted the whole thing, made it so it would be more manufacturable, switched the circuitry back to work with 6386s, the new ones that JJ was making. And that's what the Unfairchild is now. And, the circuit, the audio path of the circuit is incredibly simple. It's just an input transformer, 4 6386 tubes in parallel, and an output transformer. There's like a passive attenuator, other things that have no effect on the sound, but it's an amazingly simple audio path. All the complicated crap is in the sidechain, and it was horribly designed on the original. And so on the version that we did, we sort of cleaned up the sidechain design to make that just more sane and manufacturable. And then it was very easy to just add. You can just have an attack and release control on it. So you can just set those things.
Right.
It wasn't hard to do and not be stuck with 6 presets, which only 3 of which are particularly usable, And so now you can have the amazing sound of that incredible circuit and have all the flexibility that you'd expect, from a modern compressor. And that's something that I would use, I have 2 of them in my control room. I use them all the time. We've got a bunch of exciting stuff coming. We have a new compressor coming that's based on the Pi.
I was wondering when somebody was gonna do one. A couple people have tried to make them. They're really complicated, right?
It's a weird compressor. It's what I love about it.
Yeah.
It's pulse width modulation compression. And nobody else did it. It's such a bizarre concept. And so, it has this carrier frequency, the same way you would do like FM modulation for a radio transmitted signal, where there's a very high frequency, like 80,000 hertz. And it's a square wave. And so that signal, basically, the audio range is superimposed on that signal. And the way it turns down the volume is shifting the shape of the square wave. And so instead of being mostly positive, so like it would be up and then down for a little bit, up and down for a little bit, it shifts it the other way. So it's only up for a little bit and then down, and up for a little bit and then. That's how it turns down the volume.
Wow.
It's so bizarre. It's such a cool sound.
Okay, so how far away are you from having
We're about to start building the prototype of that.
Okay.
Yeah, and so
if you ever want to try it out, Eric, you're always.
I'll send one right over.
You're always welcome to come down and we can try it out. But that's
sure.
that's really cool. Okay, so if I were to say to you, I'm going to just shift gears for a minute. You love Led Zeppelin. What Led Zeppelin record is the best sounding one, if you had to pick one?
I would say, Zeppelin 4 overall is a great choice.
Yeah.
My single favorite sounding Led Zeppelin song is No Quarter.
They're wearing steel that's bright and true. They carry together that must get through. That's just a path where no one goes.
Because on that one, things are a little more focused sounding. Man, that thing's incredible. When you turn that up on a pair of speakers and the band comes in, it's just, it's an absolute eargasm. It's incredible.
Okay, so give me a couple of the records that are go-to.
For rock stuff, one of my longtime references is Audioslave, Show Me How to Live. Rich Costa,
yep.
Incredible mix on that. Oh, God, I don't know what happened. It's funny when I get to talk with him occasionally. He's in Vermont as well, and I'll ask him about this record. He's like, I don't know what happened on that. But yeah, sometimes those things just happen. Like it's just like lightning in a bottle, and things come together in a really amazing way. I think that's one of those moments. That particular mix on that record is incredible. Recently, I've recently been introduced to and discovered Melody Gardot. Are you familiar with her?
Yeah.
Oh my God, those records. This is a completely different universe of stuff, but it is like a who's who of all the best of Southern California record makers, mixed by Al Schmidt and all that kind of stuff. And those records are unreal sounding, absolutely breathtakingly beautiful.
Still, my heart would benefit from a little tenderness from time to time. But never mind, 'cause baby, I'm a fool who thinks it's cool if
I've read an article about frequencies that you don't like in electric guitars, like 3K, things that distorted guitars, that's like a frequency that is really a part of that. Talk about this, about your philosophy on that.
Yeah, and it's evolved a bit over time. I was very, I really had an aversion to that frequency range, anywhere from like 2K to 5K.
Yep.
That whole world.
Why?
It's just painful.
It is painful.
Yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah.
I don't want to hear it. And my hearing does seem to be sensitive in a lot of ways. It's probably, some degree of Aspergeriness or something that I have, because I don't like having ceramic dishes in the house, because when you're pulling them in and out of the cabinets or in and out of the dishwasher and it's like, I don't want to be in the room. It's really, really, really unpleasant for me. And so it's a similar sensation for me with those frequencies of the guitar. And I've had to learn over time how to make better use of them. And earlier stuff that I've done, when you listen to it, it's like that stuff is gouged out so much. And there's important energy that is held in those frequencies, specifically in that frequency range, that I didn't really know how to make use of earlier on. I've gotten better at it now. But man, that may be something that people enjoy about some of those early records. Certainly the Third Eye Blind record is subject to that. Like the guitars are really smoothed out. And, it's one of the things that was always important to me, even, mixing on NS10s and these old Uri 813s, the Blue Horn Uris, those are pretty unforgiving speakers in the mid-range. I want to be able to turn my music up
really loud and not have it be
not shredding your ears.
Yeah.
And so that was how I used to be able to get there.
Yeah.
And so those early records, I think, are fun to listen to loud,
Okay, speaking of fun to listen to loud. I know that you recorded the cymbals separately.
Yes.
That's Dave Grohl playing the drums on that.
Yeah.
Now, those guitars are so in your face.
Yeah. Very, very dry in your face guitar sound.
Yet the vocals are very dry. And that's a mixed thing too. But the drums are very dry.
Yeah.
So how do you have all these things that are kind of in your face, and yet you can hear everything?
There's a very extreme compartmentalization of frequencies going on this record. You know, the guitars are all mid-range.
Yes.
I mean, Josh was obsessed with it. It was like this 600 to 700 hertz range. It's like more 600, more 7. You know, he just wanted like a mountain of that in there. It forced the drums to be a little more scooped out sounding, where normally I would have more mid-range aggression in the drums, but the drums are kind of tuned lower, and so the sort of fundamentals of the drums are lower and kind of sit below that mid-range of the guitars, and then you just add some brightness that's sort of above the mid-range, and so the drums kind of like wrap around. They have this sort of smiley kind of EQ curve to them, and the guitar sits right in that pocket.
Did you have a snare that you used that you never changed the head on? Am I?
Yeah, yeah.
What's the story with that? What am I thinking of that and Dave Grohl broke the head or something like that?
It finally broke. Yeah.
Okay, so what kind of snare was this? And
it was a not particularly expensive or fancy Pearl Export Series, 6.5-inch chrome snare drum.
Okay.
And it had this Remo Power Stroke head on it. And so that drum with that head was used on the song Semi-Charmed Life, which we just listened to. That drum with that head was used on, any of the songs on this record where the drum was tuned a little higher, so it was like Go With The Flow with the same head.
Okay.
And so, the Queen's record was recorded in 2001, 2002, from 96. So that head was on there for like 5 years, It just always sounded good. I'd pull it out. Yep, still sounds great.
I know you do a lot of different things. I've seen your thing where in your old studio where you used to have this cloud that you would raise and lower.
Yeah, the drumbrella.
Drumbrella. Talk about the drumbrella that you used to have.
Yeah, I ripped that off fair and square from Ocean Way.
Okay.
I went to Ocean Way. It was John Bryan was in there working on stuff.
Yep.
And I just came and was visiting with him. And he was like, you gotta see this thing. Nobody uses it, but it's been in here forever. And it was exactly that, this drumbrella. And he was in Studio B at Ocean Way, I believe, was the room. It was the room that had that crazy custom console in it. And it took 1 second. He said, sit down, play these drums, and I'm gonna move this thing up and down. And I went, psh, while he moved this thing, it's like, that's it, I'm building it. It was so cool because you can tune the room to the drums, you know? Instead of like, because, I've had places in my room where it's like, I can't really tune the snare drum anywhere but around here, or it just doesn't sing in this place in the room, Different rooms and different places in the room have a particular frequency that they'll support and reinforce. And so this made it so I could tune the snare drum wherever I want.
It was motorized, right? With it had just have a chain on it? On a winch, okay.
Yeah, that you'd have like on the front of your Jeep.
And how much did the thing weigh?
It was, a couple people could lift it. It wasn't wildly, heavy. It was probably 100 pounds.
Okay.
Like that. It's roughly sort of a parabolic shape. And so that, a parabolic reflector, the idea is that when the sound goes in there, it all gets sort of focused back to the same place, and so that same place is you and your snare drum, and depending on the height of it, it would sort of change the frequency that gets reinforced, for the snare drum.
Do you like snare drums that have new drum heads?
I only change heads when I have to.
Okay.
Like if there's a point where the drum, this is not sounding good anymore, I'll pull it off and swap it out. If it sounds good, I don't touch it, Yeah, there's I don't have any need to like, okay, I'm starting a new project, change all the heads,
What do you think about ring and things like that?
I'm a huge proponent of trying to get drums in tune with the key of the song.
Okay.
And so it really depends. Like if the overtones.
When you're saying in tune, for people that don't know what that means, explain what that means.
So let's say you're in the key of C major. I often go for 1s or 4s or 5s, so that would be like C or F or G.
Yeah.
And they sort of translate as you're moving through chord changes and stuff.
Strong notes in the key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I go for notes that will sound musical within the key of the song. You know, I mean, particularly the toms have very distinct, very audible pitch to them.
Sure.
And and so often when they're not in key with the song, it's a more subliminal thing, and like something feels just not as sort of congealed and musical and sort of settled in the song. If people are playing toms and there's just like this weird pitch that flies out of nowhere, and when you get everything in tune, all of a sudden there's just like this comfort that sort of falls into place. And when you listen to old records, man, they were very, very hip to that.
Yeah.
Listen to those Motown records; those drums are in tune with the song. So that's important to me. And the overtones on a snare drum can be very complex. You get a lot of weird overtones, and so it's often, I'll tune a snare drum in the room and be hearing a particular overtone that seems dominant that I'm tuning for, and then I'll go and hear how the mics are capturing it.
And it's can be totally different.
Yeah, the mics might be capturing an overtone as being a different overtone as being the dominant one. And so it takes a little fussing around, and then if you don't really want to have to deal with it, you can dampen the snare drum more.
Do you dampen the snare drum a lot typically?
It depends what the song asks for.
Yeah.
If I'm going for a Bonhamy thing, I'll probably open it up a little more. If I'm going for like a cool old drum booth thing, like an old soul record or something, maybe like Ohio Players or something, tune it down and dampen it up and get a big old fat splatty snare drum sound, Everything has its place.
Okay, so how hard does Dave Grohl hit the drums?
He hits insanely hard.
Okay.
Because I grew up playing in rock bands.
Yeah.
Like I learned how to swing with your whole arm to play drums. I've had to learn how to not play that hard as I've sort of matured as a drummer. And because generally it doesn't sound better to overhit the drums, what I would call overhitting them. Somehow Dave Grohl plays the drums inhumanly hard. And, when we were working on that Queens thing, and he's also played on stuff on a Slash recording that I did. I've worked on several things with him. And so I would go in and initially get the drums and test the mics and just to get the sounds in the ballpark so he doesn't have to come in and sit through all of that. And go and play as hard as I can on a drum set, just like coming off the top rope on the snare drum, and get the level set with that and come in and still have to turn it down. It's insane how hard he plays, and it's insane how good it sounds him playing that way, because typically it doesn't. And something about the way he does it, I think it's just that it's so consistent. He's also inhumanly consistent. On that Queens record, everybody was like, oh man, they use samples on the drums. There's no samples on that record. That's just him playing like this unbelievable freight train machine of a drummer. I mean, he's incredible.
What about samples?
For a long time, I carried a stigma with me about it, that I feel like if I end up using a sample, I've sort of failed at recording the drums, but I think I've gotten over that, and so I'll use samples. Again, it's like whatever it asks for.
Whatever it needs.
If it makes great music, then I don't care, It can be all samples, T-Ride record, the kick drum and snare drum was all samples, And so I don't really care. I enjoy the process and the art of recording drums, real drums, a human being hitting drums. Capturing that in a way that sounds powerful and exciting and clear and musical is an art form that I have a huge appreciation and passion for. So I enjoy doing that and achieving something with that. But if a sample makes it better, I'll totally use it.
What about room mics for guitar amps and things like that?
I've gotten more into that over time. So early on, like in the T-Ride days, we were just obsessed with Eddie Van Halen's guitar sound.
Right.
I spent years chasing his guitar sound.
Yeah.
And I have some really funny experiments that I did where, because you have the convenience where his guitar is hard panned all the way one side. So you can grab the other side and play guitar on it and see if you can match his sound. And I did tests of that early on. Back in the 80s, I was a teenager. But then more recently, probably more in the last 5 to 10 years, I started to realize, because a lot of that stuff, that early stuff, was an SM57 put right up on a speaker, 412 cabinet. That was just sort of like the setup du jour for a long time for guitar. And I learned a lot about how to position miking and get it so like you get that really aggressive in-your-face sound, but try to have it not be so scratchy and unpleasant, and that sort of 2 to 5K thing or whatever. More recently, I love pulling the mics away from the guitar amps. I don't use any specific miking techniques anymore. I literally will just randomly put mics in the room. The more random, the better. And
just see which ones sound the best.
Listen. Yeah. And invariably, I'll come up with something, whoa, what a cool sound. I would have never chose to put a mic there ever if I was actually thinking about it. It's miking by chaos. It's my favorite thing now.
What are your feelings on digital amp modeling and things like that?
It's getting really good for the first time. I have a new series of videos that I'm doing, on my website where I call it the most from the least. So when I'm in California, I don't have my insane collection of equipment that's now all installed in the studio in Vermont. And so I bring a laptop, one interface, and a pair of little Atom speakers and headphones, and that's it. And so I'm doing this thing where I want to use what most people are using, I do these videos at my studio, which is now called Sonic Forest, and I have an absurd collection of stuff there. It took me decades to accumulate all this stuff. Grateful to have it. It's wonderful. I love using it. And I make videos of me using this stuff, and people are like, that's great. I don't have, a vintage RCA tube console from the 50s, Right. I don't know what to do with this, I'm having so much fun trying to make the best recordings I can possibly come up with. I literally bought the Behringer microphone set, $100 for 7 microphones.
Okay. Nice.
And then a couple of these MXL ribbon mics, they're $90 a piece.
Yep.
I'm set up in this little garage. It is acoustically treated. And so I'm using those mics on a laptop and an Antelope interface, pair of Atom speakers. Let's see what I can do, And I want to see if the experience matters, Is it the equipment or is it the experience? And to see what I can come up with. And so that's what I've been doing. And so also I have no amps. So I'm using all amp models, and they've gotten way better just in the last few years.
Which amp models do you use?
Right now, I'm really enjoying Tone X.
Okay.
The new batch from Universal Audio is really good. They have an AC30, like a Fender Twin type thing, maybe like a Marshall Blues Breaker type thing. Those are really great. They're finally getting it so the high end actually breaks up the right way.
If you had your choice between a modeler or the real thing,
I still love the real thing for the reason that I just talked about, that I can place mics totally random in a room and get a sound that nobody else will ever get or has ever heard before.
That's right.
I love that, And it's the only downfall of the modelers. It's like, I'll pull up a patch and it sounds great. Anybody else can pull that patch up, and it becomes a little bit less unique to my own thing.
Eric, where can people go watch your videos? You're on YouTube.
Yeah, so I've had a YouTube channel for a long time.
Yep.
Similar to yours, just with way less viewers.
We'll get you some more here.
Yeah, maybe.
I'll put a link in the description.
Okay, cool. And I'm transitioning everything to a website.
Okay.
And so I'm monetizing things, but I'm trying to do it in a way that really makes sense in this modern context. So the videos only cost $1 or $2 or $3, depending on the length of it. If it's over, I do long videos because I'm really trying to give you all of the information that you need to actually utilize any of the stuff that I'm talking about. These videos of 10 best mix tips in 5 minutes, doesn't really help people that much, And so I really go through and show exactly what's used, what the settings are, why the choices are made, what it sounds like with it, what it sounds like without it, and it takes time to do that. And so some of my videos are over 3 hours long, just going through a mix deconstruction,
Well, I really appreciate what you do. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Pleasure to meet you in person.
Yeah.
Too. Thanks.